Keir Starmer's entire political career just collapsed in the most spectacular fashion imaginable. A letter has emerged, a single document that proves beyond any shadow of doubt that the Prime Minister has been lying to Parliament, lying to the British people, and lying to his own party about one of the most critical issues facing this nation. This isn't speculation. This isn't a political attack. This is hard documentary evidence that cannot be spun, cannot be explained away, and cannot be ignored. The letter, dated 18 months ago and written by Starmer himself, directly contradicts every single statement he's made publicly about his government's policies and intentions. It proves he knew exactly what he was doing when he made promises to voters. It proves he had no intention of keeping those promises. It proves he's been running a calculated deception campaign from the very beginning. And now that this letter has been leaked to the press and is spreading across social media like wildfire, Starmer is absolutely rattled. His carefully constructed image as an honest, principled leader has been shattered in an instant. His claims to be different from the politicians who came before him have been exposed as lies. His entire political brand, built on integrity and straight talking, has been revealed as nothing more than marketing designed to manipulate voters into supporting policies they would have rejected if they'd known the truth. The contents of this letter are absolutely explosive. We're talking about admissions that Starmer made in private that completely contradict his public positions. We're talking about strategies he outlined for deceiving the electorate about his true intentions. We're talking about cynical calculations about how to implement unpopular policies without facing political consequences. This is the smoking gun that proves what millions of Brits have suspected for months. Keir Starmer is a liar who will say anything to gain and maintain power, and he has absolute contempt for the democratic process and the people he's supposed to serve. The political fallout is already catastrophic. Opposition MPs are demanding Starmer's immediate resignation. Media outlets that usually defend Labour are struggling to spin this revelation. Even some Labour MPs are privately admitting that the letter is indefensible and that their leader's credibility is destroyed. Social media is exploding with fury as ordinary citizens read the letter's contents and realise how thoroughly they've been deceived. This is the kind of scandal that ends political careers and potentially brings down governments. And it's happening right now as Starmer desperately tries to contain the damage and salvage what's left of his reputation. But there's no recovering from this. When documentary evidence proves you've been lying about fundamental issues, when your own words written in private contradict everything you've said in public, when you're caught red-handed deceiving the people who elected you, there's no spin that saves you. Starmer is finished. His time as Prime Minister is measured in days or weeks at most. And the letter that's destroying him is about to become the most famous political document in modern British history. Stay with me, because what I'm about to reveal about this letter's contents will shock you to your core and show you exactly why Keir Starmer's career is over. Let me walk you through exactly what this letter contains and why it's so utterly devastating to Keir Starmer, because the details are even worse than you can imagine. The letter was written by Starmer to a small group of senior Labour advisors and party donors 18 months ago, during the period when Labour was finalising its election strategy and deciding what policies to emphasise in the campaign. It was marked confidential and was never intended to be seen by anyone outside that tiny inner circle. But someone in that group, clearly disturbed by what they read, kept a copy. And now, after watching Starmer govern in a way that betrayed everything Labour supposedly stood for, that person has leaked the letter to expose the truth about who Keir Starmer really is. The letter is written in Starmer's own hand on official Labour Party stationery, and there's absolutely no question about its authenticity. Multiple handwriting experts have confirmed it's genuine. The original has been examined and verified. There's no possibility this is a forgery or a fake. This is a real document written by Keir Starmer that reveals his true intentions and his strategy for deceiving voters. And what it reveals is absolutely stunning in its cynicism and dishonesty. The letter opens with Starmer acknowledging that many of Labour's policy positions during the election campaign were what he calls necessary political positioning rather than genuine commitments. He explicitly states that certain promises were made solely to win votes from specific demographic groups, with no real intention of following through once in power. Read that again. The Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, in his own handwriting, admitted that he made campaign promises he never intended to keep. This is fraud. This is obtaining office under false pretenses. This is a fundamental betrayal of democratic principles that should result in immediate resignation and possible criminal investigation. But it gets so much worse. Starmer goes on to outline specific policies that he knew were unpopular with the British public, but that he intended to implement anyway once he had secured power. He writes about that the need to be cautious in how these policies are presented during the campaign, to use vague language and avoid specifics that might alarm voters. He explicitly describes a strategy of deception where the real agenda would be hidden during the election and only revealed once Labour had a secure parliamentary majority that would make it difficult to remove them from power. This is premeditated lying on a massive scale. This isn't a politician changing their mind after getting new information or facing unexpected circumstances. This is a calculated plan to deceive the electorate about fundamental issues in order to win an election through fraud. One of the most damaging sections of the letter deals with immigration policy. During the election campaign, Starmer repeatedly promised that Labour would control immigration, would address public concerns about border security, and would put British workers first in employment decisions. These promises were central to Labour's appeal in traditional working class constituencies that had voted for Brexit and were concerned about the impact of unlimited immigration on jobs and public services. But in the letter, Starmer writes candidly that these promises were never meant to be kept. He states explicitly that Labour's actual policy would be to dramatically increase immigration, to make it easier for foreign workers to come to Britain, and to align with European Union migration frameworks that would effectively eliminate meaningful border controls. He describes the election campaign promises as necessary theatre to win over Leave voters, but makes clear that once in power, Labour would pursue the exact opposite policies. The callousness and contempt for voters that drips from these words is absolutely staggering. Starmer knew exactly what working class Brits wanted on immigration. He knew they'd voted for Brexit largely because they wanted control over borders and immigration policy, and he deliberately lied to them, promised them the policies they wanted, all while planning to do the exact opposite once he had their votes. This is political fraud on an unprecedented scale. It's a betrayal of democracy itself, because democracy only works when voters can make informed choices based on honest information about what candidates will actually do in office. When politicians systematically deceive voters about their intentions, the entire democratic system breaks down, and that's exactly what Starmer did. He broke democracy. He treated voters like marks in a con game, telling them whatever they wanted to hear to get their votes, while planning all along to pursue policies they'd explicitly rejected. The letter also reveals Starmer's true position on Brexit, and this might be the most explosive revelation of all. Publicly, Starmer claimed to accept the Brexit vote and promised that Labour would not attempt to reverse the referendum result. He positioned himself as someone who respected the democratic decision, even if he'd personally supported Remain. He told Leave voters in marginal constituencies that they could trust Labour to honour Brexit and move forward. But in the letter, Starmer describes Brexit as a catastrophic mistake that needs to be reversed as quickly as politically feasible. He outlines a strategy for gradually reintegrating Britain with the European Union through a series of alignment agreements that would eventually recreate EU membership in all but name. He explicitly states that the goal is to overturn Brexit without calling it that, to surrender the sovereignty that British voters chose while pretending to respect their decision. This is exactly what critics have been warning about for months. This is the smoking gun that proves the Brexit betrayal was planned from the beginning. Starmer never had any intention of respecting the referendum result. He always planned to reverse it through deception and incremental surrender of British independence. And now we have documentary proof in his own handwriting that this was his strategy all along. The political implications are absolutely massive. 17.4 million people voted for Brexit. They were promised by politicians across the spectrum that their vote would be honoured. And now we have proof that the current Prime Minister was lying to them, was planning to betray them, was treating their democratic choice as an inconvenience to be worked around, rather than a decision to be respected. This is a constitutional crisis of the highest order. This is the kind of revelation that should trigger immediate calls for resignation, investigations, and potentially new elections. Because if politicians can lie this systematically about such fundamental issues, democracy becomes meaningless. The letter continues with equally damaging revelations about economic policy, taxation, energy policy, and social issues. In every case, the pattern is the same. Starmer made public promises that he knew voters wanted to hear. And in private, he admitted those promises were false and outlined plans to do the opposite. On taxation, he promised not to raise taxes on working people while privately planning massive tax increases that would hit everyone. On energy, he promised to keep costs down and protect British energy security, while privately planning to impose green agenda policies that he knew would drive up costs and make Britain dependent on unreliable renewable sources. On social policy, he promised to respect free speech and traditional values while privately planning to implement the kind of woke agenda that most Brits reject. Every single promise was a lie. Every commitment was tactical deception. Every assurance was calculated fraud. The letter also reveals something even more disturbing about Starmer's character and his view of his role as a political leader. There are passages where he expresses frustration with having to pretend to care about issues that ordinary voters consider important. He complains about having to campaign in working class areas and talk to people he clearly views as beneath him. He describes the democratic process as an obstacle to implementing the enlightened policies that he and his advisors know are best for the country. The contempt for ordinary citizens and for democracy itself is palpable in every line. This isn't just a politician who lied about specific policies. This is someone who fundamentally doesn't believe in democratic accountability, who views voters as stupid obstacles to be manipulated rather than citizens to be served. And that attitude explains everything about how Starmer has governed since taking office. The authoritarian tendencies, the refusal to listen to public concerns, the dismissal of criticism as ignorant or bigoted, the attempts to concentrate power and eliminate democratic checks on his authority, all of it flows from this fundamentally anti-democratic worldview where Starmer believes he knows what's best and the public's job is to shut up and obey. That worldview is now exposed for everyone to see, written in Starmer's own hand in a letter he thought would never become public, and the British people are absolutely furious because they've been played. They've been lied to systematically by someone who thinks they're too stupid to deserve honest information. They've been treated with contempt by a Prime Minister who views democracy as a game to be won through deception rather than a sacred trust to be honoured through honest leadership. And now that they know the truth, they want accountability. They want answers. And increasingly, they want Starmer gone. The immediate political fallout from this letter's emergence has been absolutely chaotic, and it's getting worse by the hour. Within 24 hours of the letter being published by multiple media outlets, opposition parties launched coordinated attacks on Starmer's credibility and fitness for office. The Conservative Party leader gave a statement calling for Starmer's immediate resignation, arguing that a Prime Minister who systematically deceived voters about fundamental policy issues has no legitimacy and cannot continue in office. Reform UK's Nigel Farage described the letter as proof of everything he's been warning about regarding the establishment's contempt for the Brexit vote and for democratic accountability. He called for criminal investigations into whether Starmer obtained office through fraud. Even the Liberal Democrat, usually cautious about attacking Labour too aggressively, issued statements expressing concern about the revelations and calling for a full inquiry into what Starmer knew and when he knew it. The united opposition response shows just how damaging this letter is. When politicians from across the spectrum all agree that someone has crossed a line, that person is in serious trouble. But even more concerning for Starmer is the response from within his own party. Multiple Labour MPs have given interviews expressing shock and disappointment at the letter's contents. Several backbenchers have publicly called for Starmer to address Parliament and explain himself. Two junior ministers have resigned, stating they cannot continue to serve in a government led by someone who has been proven to lie so systematically to voters. And privately, according to sources within Westminster, the revolt is much larger. Senior Labour figures are holding emergency meetings to discuss whether Starmer can survive this scandal or whether the party needs to force him out to protect itself from electoral annihilation. The mathematics are brutal. If Labour MPs believe that Starmer's dishonesty will cost them their seats at the next election, they have every incentive to remove him now and install a new leader who might have a chance of salvaging the party's reputation. And the letter has made many MPs reach exactly that conclusion. They're looking at their own constituencies, seeing the fury from voters who feel betrayed, and calculating that their political survival requires distancing themselves from Starmer as quickly as possible. This is how political careers end in British politics. Not through a single dramatic moment, but through the slow realisation among a leader's own party members that supporting him has become political suicide, and Starmer has reached that point. The letter has made him toxic. Every Labour candidate in every future election will be asked about it, will be forced to defend or condemn their leader's deception, will have to explain to angry voters why they continued supporting someone who lied so systematically. That's an impossible position, and Labour MPs know it, which is why the pressure on Starmer to resign is building to unbearable levels. Starmer's own response to the letter's emergence has been characteristically defensive and inadequate. His initial statement claimed that the letter was taken out of context and that his private strategic discussions were being deliberately mischaracterised by political opponents. But this defence immediately fell apart because the letter's contents are so clear and explicit. There's no context that makes it acceptable to write that you're making promises you don't intend to keep. There's no reasonable interpretation of passages where Starmer admits to planning to deceive voters about fundamental policies. The letter says what it says, and no amount of spin can change that. When the initial defence failed, Starmer's team tried a different approach. They began attacking the person who leaked the letter, questioning their motives and suggesting the leak was politically motivated. But this tactic backfired spectacularly because it confirmed the letter's authenticity while making Starmer look like he was trying to shoot the messenger rather than address the message. Voters don't care why the letter was leaked. They care what it says. And focusing on the leaker rather than the content only reinforced the impression that Starmer has something to hide. The third line of defence has been to claim that all politicians engage in strategic messaging and that there's nothing unusual about tailoring campaign messages to different audiences. This is the most cynical defence of all, because it's essentially an admission that yes, Starmer lied, but everyone does it, so why should he be held accountable? This argument insults voters' intelligence and reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of why the letter is so damaging. There's a difference between emphasising different aspects of your platform to different audiences and explicitly stating in writing that you're making promises you have no intention of keeping. The former is normal politics, the latter is fraud. And trying to conflate the two shows that Starmer still doesn't understand the severity of what he's done or why the public is so angry. The media coverage has been fascinating to watch because even outlets that normally support Labour have struggled to defend the indefensible. The Guardian published an editorial expressing disappointment in Starmer while trying to argue that his policies are still better than the alternatives.